Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Freedom First, the podcast where we talk about political and economic ideas that shape the economic freedom of Filipinos. I am Cesar,
And I am Jam.
and today we're diving into one of the pressing and debated issues of our time, which is economic inequality. Why does it persist? Is it always bad? And do the interventions to address it always produce positive outcomes? Now, to help us unpack these questions, we're honored to be joined by one of the most distinguished minds in Philippine economics, Dr. Raul Fabella. Raul is a national scientist in economics. It is the highest recognition granted by the Republic of the Philippines to individuals who have made extraordinary contributions to science and technology. He was conferred this rare distinction in 2011, and he is currently Professor Emeritus at the University of the Philippines School of Economics, where he also served as Dean from 1998 to 2007. A prolific thinker and respected scholar, Raul's work spans a wide range of economic issues, from the welfare effects of lobbying and rent seeking to the dynamics of informal business networks, contract properties under weak governance, and the mathematics of concave functions. He's especially known for expanding the Nash bargaining solution toward more Rawlsian and egalitarian grounds, bridging game theory with a deep concern for fairness and social justice. Raul was trained in philosophy and he earned his master's in economics from the University of the Philippines and his PhD from Yale University. Beyond his academic achievements, he has remained a sharp, vocal commentator on public policy, never shying away from hard questions about taxation, currency overvaluation, and the role of weak governance in shaping economic outcomes. Good morning, Dr. Pavelia.
Before we start with the questions, we'd like to thank the Institute of Economic Affairs in London and the Whetstone Freedom Fund for sponsoring today's episode. So, IEA, or the Institute of Economic Affairs, is an organization that supports global advocates for free market solutions, and we're proud to partner with them in the spreading ideas of liberty. Please make sure to follow us at the Foundation for Economic Freedom on YouTube, Spotify, and Facebook for the releases of these episodes. Again, thank you for joining us, Dr. Fabella.
My pleasure.
My first question would be, in your plethora of experiences as an academic, how would you define economic inequality?
Inequality refers to the distribution of income in society. In the usual parlance, it is the share of income received by certain income classes at a given time. So if the lowest 10 percentile of households in society receives 10% of all the incomes, and every other percentile income class in society receives also 10%, then we have a very income inequality that is very, very, very equal. In other words, the Gini index for that society will be zero. But if, let us say, the 99th percentile, richest percentile income class receives 100% of the income in society, and the 99% of the lower income class receives 1% of the income, then that society is very unequal. So the Gini ratio is the income of a percentile household compared to its, the Gini ratio is percentile of income received by a percentile of income households. That is called the Gini index. Thomas Piketty, as you know, a very famous economist who worked on income inequality as well, defines the percentage of income received by the top, say, 1%, top 10% of the richest income class. And he also followed it, how the share of the top percentile of income changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
His finding is very interesting, that the top percentile of income controlled an increasing share of society's income. This, of course, started the new debate on income equality all over the world. His remedy to this, since he finds this increasing inequality as disturbing, especially for the life of society as such, his remedy was higher wealth and income tax so that the quality will not increase so much. There is also such thing as asset or land ownership inequality, where few families control vast tracts of land, while many more families have either none or almost no land ownership. This was, of course, the controversy, the concern in the second half of the last century, where it culminated into land reform programs. In politics, we also make a distinction between inequality of outcomes versus inequality of opportunity. An equal distribution of outcomes, of course, leads to an equal distribution of opportunity. But the government can make access to opportunity less dependent on income, or, for example, by the use of free public education, as well as cash transfers, conditional cash transfers, which we have, both of which we have in the Philippines. As you alluded to earlier, not all income inequality is bad. Some economic inequality is, of course, of some use, because economic growth depends on capital investments. If everyone is equally poor, then there's no wherewithal with which to finance capital investments. No one has the ability to invest, and therefore there will be no growth. When the economy is poor, especially, that is low per capita income, you need some less poor people or households than others in order for them to provide the necessary capital for investment. Investment, of course, is the share of our resources, which guarantee that our future is better than our today. And so it is important for the economy to grow and for investment to be an important share of our incomes. The Philippines, in the ASEAN, only in the ASEAN, by the way, has the lowest per capita investment share of GDP. Per capita investment as of 2022 is maybe about 17%, which is lower than all the other countries in the ASEAN. And that is the reason for our rather anemic growth performance.
Is there a correlation between investment inflow in a country and as well as the lessening of inequality, at least in income? Is that a well demonstrated scientific fact, or are there no correlations in that end?
Well, I can only speak of correlation relations, not necessarily causation.
Yes, sir.
But countries that have higher per capita investment in terms of GDP, shares in GDP, will generally have lower income inequality, as well as a lower number of people under the poverty line.
I kind of want to somehow pivot back to the history of inequality, as in our species as humans. Have we, in general, sir, I mean, there are a lot of measurements of inequality. You've mentioned land use, you've mentioned, income, you've mentioned, and other metrics. But in general, sir, are we becoming more and more equal as globally? Is there even merit to evaluating our, I guess, global inequality scale, or, is it the same as in 200 years ago, 500 years ago?
Clearly, our income inequality index has gone down.
Yes, sir.
There's a time when I remember when our income inequality index was on average about 35%.
Mhm.
It is around 16%. That is because we have been growing. It's not that we have not been growing. We have been growing,
Mhm.
and technology has helped us along. And therefore, our income inequality has diminished. The other income equality measure is
Mm.
called poverty index.
Mm.
Poverty index is the number of households in society that is below the poverty line. And our poverty line is now around maybe around 15%, still higher than the poverty index in our neighborhood. But of course, we intend to reduce poverty index to maybe 10% or maybe 5%, but we have not been very successful in that regard. Our poverty index has also been decreasing. I think our poverty index is around 16% as of today.
Mhm.
And intend to reduce that to levels that is comparable with our ASEAN neighbors, that is below 10%. That is, of course, a hope that we cherish very much. Our income level, average income level in the ASEAN is, of course, also the lowest.
Mm.
Among the ASEAN countries, we are the country that we have that has not hurdled the 4,000 threshold, $4,000 per capita income threshold. We are close, but we have not crossed the line yet. So we're hoping that in the next 2 years, our income per capita will cross the 4,000 threshold and will put us on the higher middle income country category. At the moment we are classified among the lower middle income country category.
Speaking of our aim to be a high middle income country, a lot of young people right now are saying that even if we achieve that status, uh, our situation right now uh, doesn't really correspond to that reality, since a lot of Filipinos are experiencing inequality in their everyday lives. So there is this growing frustration among young people, among young Filipinos, with regards to widespread inequality in the Philippines. So their main question right now is, how are we going to eradicate income and wealth inequality? But as you mentioned earlier, you said that income inequality or wealth inequality is not always a bad thing. Perhaps it might be a good thing if there is economic growth. I'm thinking, I would like to know your answer on this. Are the young people asking the right questions? I mean, instead of asking how to eradicate income and wealth inequality, would you agree that the better question should be, how are we going to focus more on creating conditions for wealth generation?
I agree. And the sentiment of young people being alarmed is also understandable. We have been slated across the lower income inequality frontier since about 5 years ago, and it has been postponed and postponed and postponed. And so our young people's sentiment or concern that their lives may not be improving over the lives of their economic lives of their parents is well understood. As of the moment, many of our people are still getting we're hoping that their incomes will improve if they are able to find the jobs out abroad, outside the Philippines.
Mm.
That is, of course, a sad thing. We should be able to provide jobs in the Philippines, proper jobs in the Philippines for our young, for them
Right.
to be assured that their tomorrows will be better than their todays.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Dr. Fabella. As a young person myself, I feel like our economy is uh, designed to export a lot of young people abroad instead of really bringing the jobs here within our country.
One of the reasons why our job creation, especially in higher earning jobs, is very slow is because our capacity to attract investment is very slow. Both foreign as well as domestic investment is rather slow. Our foreign investment performance in the ASEAN is rather, one might call, problematic. We have always been the last in the foreign investment fiestas as well, and continue still today. On the other hand, our own domestic investment is not very high either. But the most important thing is this: our investment is largely in the non-tradable goods sector. So a good share of our investable funds, both private and public, are going into the non-tradable goods sector. Non-tradable goods sectors are real estate, banking, retailing, where the service and goods produced do not cross borders in order to find markets. By contrast, the tradable goods sector produce goods and services that has to cross borders to find markets. So they could be food, could be equipment, it could be wire harness, which we export, or computer chips that we also export. It's just that we have not been able to attract enough foreign investors to our shores. And even when we have them already here, many have opted to change locations. Many have opted to relocate to Vietnam, for example, because of their better deal that they're getting, the Vietnamese authority.
Right. For our viewers' information, since we've read your works, in connection to the need to attract more investments, you're also a strong advocate of reviving our manufacturing sector, right?
Yes, reviving our manufacturing sector. One side of that is really just greater opening up to foreign investments. In the last few years, we have had a new law, or the amended Public Sector Act, I think PSA or thereabouts, where we liberalized entry into many sectors that used to be closed.
Yes.
Many sectors that used to be closed were opened up by the amended Public Sector Act. And so our advocacy for a more open economy, meaning through the lifting of the ownership ceilings on foreigners, meaning to say that, let's say, the constitutional provisions on ownership ceiling is still there, but some people have said we have already addressed some of our hurdles by the Philippine Public Sector Act amended.
Yeah.
My problem with the amended Public Sector Act is that at the moment it is being challenged in the Supreme Court, and until the Supreme Court has finally spoken and said that it is constitutional, then it will not be able to move the needle in investment. But my own viewpoint is that for as long as there is a constitutional provision in favor of limiting foreign ownership, then there will always be a reason to argue that the PSA is anti-Filipino or against the Constitution,
Mhm.
because the Constitution clearly says that Filipino first is our policy in respect
Yeah.
to foreign investments.
Mhm.
And so that is why our advocacy, I'm included among the FEF team here, our advocacy continues to the point where these constitutional provisions are lifted
Mm.
completely. When those are lifted completely, then the Supreme Court will not have the reason to re-examine the PSA decision. So it's still an important advocacy that
Yes.
the constitutional provisions on ownership ceiling.
Yeah, Raul, I find it interesting to see that our legal system is a critical factor in terms of really addressing economic inequality.
Dr. Fabella, thank you for your, I mean, it's an interesting but long discussion, about charter change and all of that. I
Hmm.
kind of want to pivot to another topic. I mean, it's still in economic inequality, but I remember when I was a student in high school, our history professor, or well, that time teacher was talking about how a lot of our inequality is a byproduct of our colonial legacies. Meaning, some of us are poor because we have in ourselves, in our culture, sort of a baked in, like a mass psychological thing where we are inherently against each other's progress. There's a term crab mentality, and all those things, which points to our inequality as somehow a product of our culture as as a former colony, of many countries. So I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Fabella, as an economist, is there even merit to this thinking, or do you have an alternative view of why we have inequality in our midst?
Culture is clearly a factor in our economic outcomes. But culture is every economy is confronted with some cultures that are, as it were, anti-efficiency. Some cultures are mostly pro-equity rather than efficiency. But we can only blame culture so much. I think the biggest blame for our outcomes, our poor outcomes in economics, is our own making, as it were. For example, our own economic policies in land policy. For example, in agriculture, our agriculture is hampered by the land reform law, which privileged distribution and fragmentation of land
Mhm.
rather than efficiency of land of farm production. I'm in a conversation with some people at PLDT, and I know that MVP Pangilinan, Manny Pangilinan, is very concerned why there is a bias in favor of smallness in our regulation. In other words, pag medyo ang kalaban ng PLDT is medyo mga maliliit, they will immediately regulate. You
Mhm.
are already too big. You should give way to the small ones.
Mhm.
Problem is, of course, our too big in the Philippines is small in comparison to the global rivals. So in the Philippines, we have Nick Joaquin, who is, I think, a national artist and a novelist, once wrote an essay called Our Heritage of Smallness. Mga maliliit, tingi-tingi attitude, no? And our governmental tendency is to, of course, prefer or side with the smaller crabs. But if you compare PLDT to global players in the world, it's a very small entity. So our concept of large is very local rather than very global. So I just wrote a piece, which I shared with them, and I will share with you shortly, where this bias towards smallness come from in the Philippine economy. The fundamental theorem in economics is called the two welfare theorems in economics.
Mhm.
The fundamental theorem says if markets are perfectly competitive, it will also be welfare maximizing.
Yeah.
It says nothing about the role of government there.
Yeah.
Why is that so? Why? Because to be able to prove the welfare theory, the first welfare theorem, you need the production technology to be homogeneous of degree one. Homogeneous of degree one production means that if you multiply every input by the same positive number lambda, you multiply the output by the same positive number lambda. But this production technology means it's the marginal product or the average product of a firm that employs 100 units of capital and 100 units of labor is the same as the average product of a firm employing 1 unit of capital and 1 unit of labor. There will be no difference in their average productivity. Ano ang naging translation yan sa Philippine policy? Land reform. We fragmented farms. Now the farm limit ownership of farms is 5 hectares. But mostly our average farm is less than 1 hectare. Very small. And less than 1 hectare is not viable to make you sustainable to send your children to school. Only if you are a small farm like that, but you are very close to the market, like you are just outside Marikina, can you be a viable 1 hectare farmer? But if you are in Tawi-Tawi, a viable 1 hectare farm is not viable. And the banks will not touch you. If the banks do not touch you, you will have to get financing from informal lenders. Informal lenders will charge you 70% interest per annum. Babaon ka lang sa utang. Nothing will happen to you. So if you believe there's no scale economies, which is the feature that I described to you, in other words, 100 is the same as 1 unit, then a 1 hectare farm is the same productivity as a 100 hectare farm. And that's, of course, completely wrong.
Yeah. Yes.
This is what our economists who studied in the West learned from the fundamental theorems of welfare. That is, of course, flatly wrong.
Dr. Fabella, I just wanted to, since of course you're talking about land fragmentation, of course, and some economists like Dr. Fermin Adriano, an agricultural economist, of course, points to fragmentation as perhaps the chief driver of our underdevelopment,
Correct.
to put it lightly, in agriculture. But how, I'm wondering even now, how did our policymakers make it so wrong back then? I mean, I can appreciate how they meant well. I mean, it's a redistribution effort so that everyone has a parcel of land. But did they not foresee what will happen in, in, is it not part of their calculations or in their simulations that it will lead to fragmentation instead of scalability in.
Exactly. I think that Fermin Adriano is correct. The biggest problem is in our farm economy is fragmentation. And fragmentation leads to other things. For a 3-hectare owner of land, the banks will not even entertain you.
Yeah. Yes.
So where do you get capital? You get capital by borrowing from informal lenders.
Yes.
Informal lenders will charge you very, very high. So much that you will probably in 5 years, you will have to pay your informal lenders. You will have to allow them to cultivate your land. In other words, you get out of the cultivation altogether. So why is that so? Well, in the 1950s, when land reform was being talked about, economists who were trained in the West already learned about the welfare theorems in economics,
Yeah.
and that there's no room for government, and therefore government can only be superfluous. No? But in fact, government is very important, but even more important when government is led by wrong economic ideas. Like in the 1970s, economic ideas was largely driven not just by economics and the welfare theorems in economics, but by the book called Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, German economist.
Yes.
And everyone from then on thought that we should probably allow fragmentation so to obtain equity in land ownership, but it doesn't cost us anything in terms of economic efficiency. Absolutely wrong. Our policymakers in 1988, when they were deciding on comprehensive agrarian reform, they believed in the romantic view of small is beautiful. And perhaps the first welfare theorem that scale economies does not exist. Exists only in the minds of people, or of some people. But I think that economists should have known better. First of all, our templates for land reform in 1988, when we passed the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, were Japan and Taiwan. They were our templates for land reform. But Japan and Thailand stopped their land reform only up to the grains farms on grains, meaning rice and corn. Tayo, in 1988, we forgot about economics, and we extended the compass of land reform to all crops, whether they be coconut or sugar or even fishing, puno, no, all crops, regardless of the fact that these crops have different requirements. Lahat ay subject to provision of 5-hectare ownership ceiling in our land reform law, and the inability of land reform beneficiaries to trade their land. So if you are a farm beneficiary with 2 hectares and you want to send your child to Dubai to work there, you need money. You might be tempted to pawn or sell your land.
Yeah. Yes.
Get money to finance the trip. But you cannot, because the law says you cannot trade. You cannot sell or barter or trade your land except to the government and through the mediation of the land bank. And so what happens is they actually put a stop to many possible avenues of, let us say, investment or new ways of making money. Because land is not tradable. Yun yung pinaghihirapan namin ni Toti. Make owned lands or rewarded lands tradable. Pwede silang magbenta. O ikaw ay you're a farmer. You are cultivating 5 hectares of land. But you are also trained in, also went to school to Los Baños. And so you know land productivity very well. You know what to plant, when to plant, when to. So you're a very productive farmer. But if you want to increase the scale of your production, and your neighbors have lands that are not very productive, and you want to own them, you can't, because you can. The ownership ceiling is 3 hectares. Is 5 hectares. You cannot buy, and at that rate, you cannot also borrow find capital in the banking sector. So yes, many of our policymakers, our constitutionalists at that time in 1988, were largely driven by the romantic view that small is beautiful.
Okay.
Small is just as productive as large. Very wrong. Now our neighbors, Taiwan, is already beginning a program called small farm owners but large farm cultivators. In other words, kahit na maliit yung ownership mo ng lupa, you can lease that land to large cultivators so that the cultivators will, the farmers will start to cultivate larger and larger tracts of land.
Dr. Fabella, I think this very much clearly paints a picture of how there's really a correlation between productivity and, reducing inequality, because farmers in the Philippines are among the lowest income groups, right? And it's a dismal to put it sector. But of course, we're at FEF, we're trying to advocate for remedies to this.
We had an interview back in 2020, and you also discussed the same thing back then. You mentioned your firsthand experience of being criticized by different groups and people because of your advocacy to boost our efficiency. So some people who supported equity were kind of furious about this, and even some economists wrote columns about your works on CARP, for example, uh, saying that your conclusions are not true, uh, they were faulty, and yet there was this study in 2020 that seemed to vindicate your arguments and conclusions. I think this is the study by Adamopoulos and Restuccia to the effect of our land reform on our agricultural productivity. Now, I just remembered that this international study found that it greatly reduced our agricultural productivity due to land fragmentation and some of its provisions, some of the loss provisions that prohibited people from leasing their lands um, until they pay their amortizations. Uh, I guess in that regard, you won the argument about efficiency versus equity. Now, going back to the broad problem of inequality in our country, it is a valid problem that we need to, or it is a valid concern, as you said earlier, that we need to address. And of course, other countries as well are having similar debates with regards to inequality. Are there silver bullets in addressing inequality in these countries? And would some of them be applicable here in the Philippines? Have we tried applying them? And if so, if not, why haven't we done them yet?
In the Philippines, things move very slowly because of
Yeah.
economy associated with change. For example, the land reform, the 1988 Land Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law
Mm-hmm.
was not renewed in 2016 thereabouts. But its effect is still very much because before the land reform law was ended in 2016 or thereabouts, the land reform authorities declared all lands as land reform area, and therefore all laws associated with land reform. For example, you cannot buy or sell land in a land reform associated area. Still valid for those areas. Why our advocacy is still just completely do away with the land reform, comprehensive agrarian reform law. Let's start over, and let's focus on attracting private capital into a farming. Private capital who has been escaping the farm sector for 40 years because of land reform and the chaos with respect to property rights in farming. So if we completely do away with land reform, that would be one area where we improve productivity very quickly because our private capital, meaning to say, I'm talking about people who are interested, people who have large capitals like the conglomerates who are interested in farming to go back to farming. For example, si MVP, he once told us sa school and asked, I heard that the Undersecretary of Agriculture was saying that there are as much as 100,000 hectares ready to be leased to private entrepreneurs. Saan ito? Nagtanong siya, saan ito? Can you ask around? So we asked around. And true enough, these 100,000 hectares was actually fragmented. There's 3 hectares in Tawi-Tawi, 5 hectares in Sorsogon, 4 hectares in Cavite. Sabi ni the entrepreneur in MDP said, that is not my expertise. My expertise is production.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sign a contract with a single person.
Yeah.
I will sign on the other side for 25 years of lease. I'm not interested in owning 10,000 hectares of land. I'm interested in just leasing 10,000 hectares of land. And I will put in billions of pesos. But if this is the case where I have to sign with 10,000 small farmers, wala na ako dyan. I'm out of it. I'm out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So there are conglomerates who are interested in farming. In fact, MVP has now put in a lot of money in industrial farming. All the plants are covered, all the plant covers are air conditioned so that plant growth is optimized. But this is not very big piece of land. I think this is about 25 hectares lang. And the reason is industrial siya.
Mm-hmm.
All plants are covered. But you cannot do that in the whole Philippines. You don't even have electricity in many farm areas. But I'm happy that MVP has finally put his foot on the ground with respect to vegetable farming vegetable production. So there is a dictum in economics, which is still valid. That is, if you want to help the poor directly by giving them cash transfers or money transfers. Don't distort business decisions in favor of workers. In other words, if you want to help the poor, do conditional cash transfers.
Mm-hmm.
Don't distort business decisions through such things as tataasan mo yung minimum wage or you destroy the production technology. That is a very counterproductive way of helping the poor. You want to help the poor directly. Give scholarships to their children. Don't distort production decisions by law.
Mm-hmm.
So many of our endeavors to help the poor were actually counterproductive.
Is there a friction when we talk about individual freedoms and when we talk about lessening inequality? Meaning, what I mean to say is, in our pursuit of course, of lessening inequality globally, does it automatically lead to more freedoms, individual freedoms? If not, are there cases perhaps that freedom is constrained by the government trying to, I guess, brute force equality through, like what you said, interfering with a market, interfering with this.
I'm also a student of what is known as collective action problems and groups that are able to solve collective action problems. For example, the building of the Three Gorges Dam in China
Mm.
as opposed to the building of the dam in
Is it kaliwa, sir?
Kaliwa
Yeah.
Dam.
Yes, sir.
Kaliwa Dam.
Mhm.
That's supposed to generate electricity as well as increase water supply to Metro Manila. 25 years na, hindi pa rin nagawa.
Mm.
Hindi natin masolve yung mga uh, claims ng mga local people, no? Indigenous peoples. The Three Gorges Dam was built in 10 years with extra money and extra resources. And now it is a very important world status symbol with respect to the dam building and water control, flood control, as well as generation of electricity. This is the Three Gorges Dam. Now, societies that are able to solve collective action problems, like a dam is a collective action problem. You need to get people to work together to bring about these assets or these entities. You need discipline, perhaps from the government, perhaps from the private sector. You need discipline to bring about collective action successes. Many of our neighbors have become very adept at solving collective action problems, providing airports, providing bridges, providing expressways. But in order for these assets to be built, you need discipline among people. And discipline is always, by its very definition, a kind of a control
Mhm.
individual freedoms, a feature of control of individual freedoms. And so in that case, being able to bring about these expressways and these dams and these airports, you need social control and therefore a feature that reduces individual freedoms, as it were. But the reduction in individual freedom could only be done if it is done voluntarily. In other words, if I work for the Three Gorges Dam, I should be assured that I will be properly remunerated.
Yeah.
Three Gorges Dam is a miracle of collective action success. Remember, 1.3 million people were relocated to higher grounds. That included the relocation of about 120 municipalities and about 13 cities. It's really a humongous project. And many Western observers thought it will never be accomplished. But it was accomplished in time, in due time, and in budget, within budget.
Mm.
Why is that? The reason I think is the fact that the Chinese people have become accustomed to the Chinese authorities being able to deliver
Mm.
that's collective action successes in time and on budget. And so when they decided to build the Three Gorges Dam, the policy themselves decided to they voluntarily gave in to the project. The project having many people having to sacrifice their homes to be elevated to higher grounds. And so this is what I'm saying, that the Three Gorges Dam at the moment is producing about 26 megawatts of power. 26 megawatts, gigawatts of power. 26 gigawatts of power is about 3/4 of all the powers generated, electric power generated in the Philippines. And 3 years ago, it was actually as much all the powers generated in the Philippines. So it is really humongous. But in order to put together successes in collective action problems, you have to get them together to cooperate. Cooperation is very important, but cooperation is only done if you are able to first pay the workers their due, if they believe that the central authority will deliver and will not be stunted by corruption, for example, And they were able to deliver the Three Gorges Dam. Sa atin naman, yung ating Kaliwa Dam,
Mhm.
Kaliwa River Dam, 40 years na in the drawing board yan. Nothing has happened yet. So that is why um, our capacity to grow, to perform economically, is hampered by the fact that our infrastructure is rather poor. In other words, kung may kaliwa dam na producing enough electricity, there will be no more red red alerts in Metro Manila. And you know, red alerts are very
Yeah.
costly because ang red alerts kasi, pag nag-red alert ang power, you have to bring in small power generating stations, mostly run by oil. And these small generating stations are first very costly. And second, you have to reimburse the firms for bringing in their small generating plants. In other words, for example, EDSA will stop buying electricity from the grid and then will start their own generating unit. But that means you will have the grid has to reimburse the Schumart, EDSA, for the difference in the cost of running their units, which is very costly, and the cost of just buying electricity from the grid.
Mhm.
Kaya yung ating electricity price is very high. But the important thing is, if you have good electricity, one of the most important bar to foreign investment in the Philippines is the presence of very high cost electric power cost, high power cost. Pinakamataas tayo sa sa, sa ASEAN. Pinakamataas ang ating
Mm.
cost ng power to large establishments is very high. Higher, almost as high as Singapore.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fabella. We started this discussion with a disclaimer that our topic is complex because dealing with inequality is a very complicated and contentious discussion, and we know it. And I like that you ended our discussion with a reference to collective action problems.
Oh.
Uh, Reflecting on it, yeah, I understand that the Philippines has a big problem in terms of its uh, collective action in making collective decisions since we have to balance competing interests, which you have discussed in your book, Capitalism and Weak States, Capitalism and Inclusion under a weak state. So
Okay.
it's quite complicated. We have to balance, or rather, we have to choose between different interests, different principles of economic freedom, efficiency, and equity.
Mm.
And I guess it will always be a nuanced topic. It's gonna be an open-ended discussion, especially uh, between policymakers and the public. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Raul Fabella.